And on this episode of the Toughen Up Leadership podcast, something that happened recently that really rocked me to the core and what it did to make me think a little differently. And then, imposter syndrome, what does that mean? Do you really belong where you are? We're going to talk about that. And finally, we're going to wrap it up with another ridiculous workplace trend. What do we call it? We had the quiet quitting, we had the quiet firing, and now we have career cushioning. What is career cushioning? What does it mean? And is it really something that we need to worry about? And that is the episode. Are you ready for this? Then let's toughen up, Buttercup. Welcome to the Toughen Up Leadership Podcast. This is Jason Kissler, and it has been a nice, long, relaxing holiday. It's been a little while since I've recorded a podcast. A lot of things have been going on. So one of the first things that I really wanted to cover was something major that happened to me back in November, right at the beginning of the holidays, that really kind of shook me to the core and made me start to think a lot about the direction that I'm wanting to go, starting to really dig into my why question and why I was really doing what I was doing. And then, unfortunately, on November 18th, and it was right before the major Thanksgiving break, when people started to disappear for the holidays, and my wife and I were planning on going on a vacation to Alabama, and right before we ended up leaving, got the phone call from my aunt that my mother had finally lost her battle with cancer. She'd been sick for a while, and it was something that we were all expecting, but it doesn't matter, whether you expect something like that or not, it still hits you pretty hard. And my relationship wasn't as close with my mother as I would have liked it to have been, but it was close enough. I was definitely involved in her life as this was going on, and I was talking to her, and usually once or twice a week, just to see how she was. She was just miserable, and I think that this was probably the best thing for her, but it really makes you think about what's important, because when you lose somebody and you start to address your own mortality, you start to think, well, there's really not as much time as you think there is in life. And so it really hits you pretty hard to say, you need to start focusing on the important things. Forget about the little things that just don't matter as much. So I took the opportunity for the holidays to really do some introspective thinking, really focusing on what it is that I'm trying to accomplish and, what my purpose or my why is. And I was happy to say that actually reinforced the fact of what I'm doing with the podcast, with my videos and all of my coaching is really just to help. I want to be able to be known, when my time comes, that I made a difference, I impacted lives. So that's really the thought that came out of the holiday break and after Christmas and New Year's. And it was just, I think it helped me to really spur on the things that I'm trying to accomplish, to not get bogged down by the minutia and just to keep really pushing forward. And I think I made the comment to somebody that even in her death, she still inspired me, because the event pushed things forward for me. So I just want to give a little tribute to my mother. She was an amazing woman. She had a complicated life, but I respected her incredibly, and she will definitely be missed. So moving on from that, the one of the things that I've been talking about recently that I really think is important for leaders, especially because there's so much extra burden put on someone in a leadership position, someone who is responsible for not just themselves. They have to think about a team. They have to think about, depending on how high in the leadership caste you are, per se, of the level of accountability to the success of the department or even the success of the company overall. So because of this extra burden, there is something that plagues a lot of leaders. It's something that it seems to, no matter how good you get at what you're doing, no matter how long you've been doing it, you still get something you can still get something that's referred to as imposter syndrome. And it really is the thought that you don't belong where you are. So you get promoted, you have a lot of success, and at some point you look back and you think, well, I don't think I really deserved this. I'm not sure that this was supposed to be for me. I think that I got this because of luck. I mean, this was not me working at it. This was not my skill. This was just coincidence, or there was no one else. That's a big one. Well, there was no one else to pick, so of course by default, I got the management position. Nobody else applied for it. So it just depends on the scenario that puts you where you are, but it's a very common thing for leaders to deal with. And I can tell you, from the perspective of coming up and losing my vision in my 20s and then becoming a blind engineer, there was definitely a lot of imposter syndrome where I was just waiting for someone to say, you can't really, we admire your effort, but you just can't do it, and no matter how hard I tried and how much I pushed, there was still always that thought in my mind of, what if they change something and then I can't use this tool anymore, and then what's going to happen, and all this stuff that I worked for is going to be for nothing. And again, it's another form of imposter syndrome, the fact that it doesn't matter how hard I worked and my ability to adapt to situations, it doesn't matter about any of that. It's this voice in my head that's always saying you don't belong where you are. Now I think finally I've gotten to the point where I'm comfortable enough that I don't have that voice as much anymore. It's always there. And I think for any leader, there's always a little bit of self-doubt because you're a human. So the point is that, I really feel like a lot of leaders, it doesn't even, like I said, it doesn't matter how long they've been there, they'll still think about, well, I'm one bad decision away from losing everything. And it's a real issue, and it's psychological because it came from some deeply rooted issue, most likely from childhood or being a young adult. And so it's not just something you can click off. There's definitely some cognitive work that has to be put into shifting your mental hang-ups about it. So, one of the things really is to remember the accomplishments that you've made and keep repeating those to yourself. That, look, I've done all these things, and I've had to go back in my own career and when I feel down about something and go back and look, where were you 10 years ago and where are you now? And, you can't just accidentally fall into all these positions. There was effort. There was the choice that the managers had, whether or not to hire you, to promote you, whatever. So that's one of the ways to really combat this imposter syndrome. And another way, honestly, is you kind of have to keep repeating to yourself that it's normal that you feel this way. It's like dealing with fear. Everybody has fear. The courage is not the lack of fear, but in the controlling of how you respond to the fear. So it's the same thing with the imposter syndrome, which essentially is a fear. And it's not a matter of getting rid of it. It's always there. It's a question of how do you deal with it and what things can you do. And the big things to do is to identify the areas where you feel like it's being triggered. So if certain things happen, like for example, you get this feeling whenever you're about to present something to the board of directors or something like that, look for those triggers. And then from there, try to figure out, okay, well, whenever they trigger, I need to repeat this mantra of, I've accomplished these things before. Have stuff in your head already. You don't want to just have to think about it right when it's happening. So it's better to put this together ahead of time of, here's, 5 major accomplishments where I really pushed my limits, and remember those. And then again, repeat to yourself, look, this is normal. And a lot of people have this problem. So I'm in good company, because a lot of leaders constantly have the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they feel like they're not prepared, they're not qualified. So it's a pretty normal thing. And usually when you think of it in that way and you reframe that fear, then a lot of times that's enough to help you get over the trigger that causes your fear of imposter syndrome in the first place. So just a couple of thoughts on that, because I know that's a big deal with a lot of people, especially new managers who get the position and they really don't, they want to be managers, but they're not, they're not skilled at it yet. They haven't been taught anything about how to be a manager. They were an individual contributor for a long time and they excelled at that, but management's a whole different skill set. And so now they're in new territory and they really don't know what they're doing. And it's okay to not know what you're doing all the time. That's the point of learning and failing and learning from your failures and moving forward. So, most places are not going to necessarily punish failure as long as there's learning from it. Now, I can't speak for every boss, because there are some places that, they operate in fear like that. But those places are not places that you'd want to work anyway. You don't want to work somewhere where everybody's afraid to fail because of retribution, and so they don't take any risks, and they never push the envelope forward. So that's just that's a totally different discussion. That might require a job change to get away from a situation like that. But when you're in an environment where, failure, as long as it's not repeated, as long as there's learning from it, is welcome, because that's how you grow. So I think it's okay to, when you get into these new positions, or you become a new manager or even a new executive, it's okay not to know what you're doing all the time. You don't always have to have all the answers. It'd be nice. I'd love to have all the answers all the time, but it doesn't happen, and it doesn't need to happen. You'll get those answers either through training or education, or just through experience. You'll end up getting the answers that you need to do the job successfully. So I think that's another big issue with new managers, is that stress of, I've got to be perfect. I've got to know what I'm doing on day one. I've really got to figure this out. So, just take a breath. It's okay. If you really feel overwhelmed, that's where coaching and mentors come into play. You've got someone in your corner that can help you with an outside perspective of what's going on, and maybe help you to course correct a little bit if you're going the wrong way, or you're about to make a really poor decision. Just bounce these kind of things off of a mentor or a coach and see what they say. Also accountability is a big thing for coaching and mentors. They'll keep you accountable. If you say you're going to do something and then you come up with a bunch of excuses, they're going to let you know. Yeah, no, I'm not buying that. Not buying that excuse. So moving on to the next topic here, and this is something that I can't help but laugh at these things. And I don't want to sound like old school here, but I'm telling you that this younger generation, I see this a lot, where they feel like they've discovered something new because they're the geniuses in the world, and they put a clever title to it, they throw it up on TikTok, and now it becomes some sort of new craze. And I've talked about these before, the quiet quitting, the quiet firing. It's like these things have been going on longer than they've been alive. But now it's a thing because they've discovered it and put a clever name to it. Well, here's another one to add to the list. This is nothing new. This has been going on, but this is a little different because it hasn't actually been going on forever, depending on the type of person that you are. So this new TikTok craze is called career cushioning. So again, nice little clever phrase so that you can put it into a 40-second TikTok video. But in essence, this really means that you're always looking for the next job. You're never focusing on making the job that you have work. You're always looking for the next big thing. So my thought on this is really, there's two things. First of all, there may be a time and place for that type of behavior. So for example, you're working somewhere, you know you're not happy, you obviously don't want to quit before you get a new job, so you take the opportunity to look. That's what you're doing. You're entertaining other ideas. Now, it's one thing to passively entertain, because with the connectivity on LinkedIn and everything else, you can have a profile, not be looking for a job, and still get hit up by different recruiters that say, are you looking for anything? We're looking for this type of position. Do you have what we need? You can still get, and so you can passively entertain other job opportunities and even go as far as to interview. But the idea of career cushioning is the active seeking out of another position constantly. Whether you want to leave or not, you're always looking for another position. Now, like I said, there's two things here. Obviously the first thing is that there may be a time for that. So it's not always a bad thing. But to have that as a constant mindset of, I am here working and I'm always looking for the next job. The main thing about that bothers me is that you're never focusing on your current job. So now think of this from an employer perspective. I'm hiring you to do a job and I want your focus on that job. I don't want your focus split with how am I going to get the next job. Because I guarantee you that if you're looking for a job, you're using office and work time to find that job. You may be submitting some things, after hours, resumes, whatever, but I guarantee you're taking the phone calls, you're making the interviews, you're researching the companies, you're doing all that stuff during your work time. So on top of the fact that you're potentially using, work resources, work time to look for this job, you're also not using your own mental resources in the job that you have. And I'm still, and this I will say, I'm old school. I still have the idea of a certain level of loyalty when it comes to work. I know that may seem silly to a lot of people because when you are subject to being laid off, there's no loyalty there. They'll let you go in a heartbeat. But not all companies are like that. And there are companies that they want to keep people as long as they can. And so they do want a sense of loyalty. And then they get stabbed when all they get are a bunch of young people that are constantly looking for the next position. And so I think that's a consideration when an employer is looking to hire someone is, are they going to be here for a while, or do I think they're young and hungry and they're just going to keep jumping from job to job? So, that's just something to consider. But this idea of, career cushioning, the thought of looking for another job while you have one, again, not anything new. This is nothing new. Just like quiet quitting and quiet firing. There was nothing new about either one of those things either. They've been going on forever. But the mentality of the younger generation that looks at a job, as a means to an end, not even necessarily a career in some cases, but a means to an end, and looks at the employer as just a necessary evil to make money, not as it could be you as that employer. One day you might have a business and want to hire people. And so now imagine that all these young people are looking at you like you're the evil rich, employer who has, no care about their employees and just wants to make a bunch of money and be greedy. And that's the kind of divide that's being created in the workforce today. And it's a shame. And that's why I recommend to anyone, stay away from TikTok. The stuff on there is toxic. It's just, there's rarely anything good that comes off of that. It's always the negativity that really just, I don't know. I've just seen too many things on there, and I say, I don't understand why people watch this. I mean, it just further fosters your ADHD if you can't focus on something for more than 60 seconds. So that's just one of my own pet peeves. But it's just funny that all of these weird rehashes of old and not necessarily good behaviors are just being glorified on TikTok. So it's I don't even bother. I don't necessarily mind short videos, but TikTok just has this rare set of videos with the morals and ethics that I just don't think are healthy, and all of the young people are watching it. So parents, pay attention. And that's going to do it for this week's episode. Appreciate everybody watching. Don't forget to check us out at www.sapphireleadershipadvisors.com. Have an amazingly productive week.